Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. In August 2025, Canada stunned the world by halting all copper exports to the United States, immediately and completely. The announcement came without warning, catching both governments and global markets off guard. Overnight, a resource that had quietly powered North American industry for generations was suddenly off-limits, and the implications were enormous. This wasn't a minor tweak, it was a total shutdown of a resource vital for everything from construction to smartphones. Copper is the backbone of modern infrastructure, used in power grids, electric vehicles, and the wiring inside nearly every electronic device. Without it, entire industries grind to a halt, and the ripple effects are felt far beyond the factory floor. The move sent shockwaves through markets and boardrooms, signaling a new aggressive phase in US-Canada trade tensions. Investors scrambled to reassess their positions, and CEOs convened emergency meetings to strategize around the sudden supply shortfall. The price of copper soared overnight, and uncertainty rippled through global supply chains. For decades, copper was a cornerstone of their economic partnership. The US and Canada had built a relationship on mutual trust and shared prosperity, with copper flowing freely across the border to fuel growth on both sides. This abrupt halt marked a dramatic departure from that legacy. Now Canada was weaponizing it, making clear it would no longer absorb US economic pressure without fighting back. The message was unmistakable. Canada was willing to leverage its natural resources as a tool of national policy, even if it meant economic pain at home. Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Mark Carney declared, "Canada will not be bullied. Our resources are not bargaining chips." His words echoed across the country, rallying public support and sending a clear signal to Washington that the old rules no longer applied. The ban was a direct response to new American tariffs, timed for maximum impact. By targeting copper, Canada struck at a critical vulnerability in the US economy, choosing a moment when American manufacturers were already struggling with supply chain disruptions. It wasn't a threat, it was action, catching US industries off guard. Factories that depended on Canadian copper were forced to halt production, and workers faced sudden layoffs as companies scrambled to find alternative sources. The world watched as a critical supply chain was severed overnight. News outlets around the globe reported on the escalating standoff, and analysts warned of long-term consequences for international trade. Billions of dollars and countless jobs were suddenly at risk. The economic fallout was immediate, with layoffs, factory closures, and a sharp decline in investor confidence. The stage was set for a high-stakes economic confrontation. Behind closed doors, diplomats and negotiators scrambled to find a solution, but neither side seemed willing to back down. Canada's message, clear and unwavering, was that it would endure hardship to defend its sovereignty. Across the country, citizens rallied behind their leaders, determined to stand firm in the face of external pressure. The US now faced a crisis it hadn't anticipated, with ripple effects threatening to reshape the balance of power in North American trade for years to come. The spark for Canada's drastic move was President Trump's July 2025 executive order, a decision that would send shockwaves through North American trade. In a move that stunned both allies and rivals, the US administration announced sweeping new tariffs targeting Canadian industries. Chief among them was a staggering 50% tariff on Canadian copper products, instantly making it far more expensive for Canadian companies to do business with their largest trading partner. This was no small tax. It sent prices soaring overnight, leaving US buyers scrambling to adjust. For many American manufacturers, the cost of copper-based goods shot up, threatening supply chains and squeezing profit margins. The Trump administration justified the move as a national security measure, claiming it was necessary to protect critical American industries. But in Ottawa, officials and business leaders saw it as pure protectionism, a thinly veiled attempt to give US companies an unfair edge. The copper tariff didn't come out of nowhere. It followed earlier duties on Canadian steel and aluminum, which had already strained relations and sparked heated debates on both sides of the border. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick hinted that even more tariffs could be on the horizon, leaving Canadian producers anxious about the future and uncertain about how to plan ahead. As if that weren't enough, the U.S. also scrapped the de minimis rule, imposing tariffs on nearly all imports over $100. This move hit small businesses and cross-border shoppers especially hard, adding new layers of complexity and cost. For Canada, it was becoming clear that this was more than a series of isolated measures. It was a pattern. The US rewriting trade rules to its own advantage regardless of long-standing agreements or neighborly goodwill. Ottawa pushed back, arguing that the national security justification was flimsy at best, a convenient excuse to shield American industries from competition and undermine Canada's economic stability. The 50% copper tariff was the last straw for many in Canada, painting the US as determined to win at any cost, even if it meant upending decades of cooperation and trust. The trade relationship was now in uncharted, hostile territory. Canada faced a stark choice: accept the new reality or fight back to defend its industries and sovereignty. Instead of tit-for-tat tariffs, Canada went nuclear. It cut off copper exports entirely. The move was calculated to show just how much leverage Canada held as a key supplier. Canadian leaders argued that years of negotiation had failed. Only a dramatic step would get Washington's attention. The export ban was framed as economic self-defense, not aggression. "Our resources are not bargaining chips," Carney repeated, echoing national frustration. The decision had broad support in Canada, where many felt US protectionism had gone too far. Severing this supply chain signaled a fundamental shift. Trust was gone. Canada was willing to risk its own economy to send a message. The old rules of engagement were over. The White House's response was immediate and furious. President Trump called Canada's move economic aggression, blaming Ottawa for the crisis. He fixated on a single number: $4.20 billion, the value of copper the US imported from Canada the previous year. Trump's message? Canada was taking billions from the American economy. This simple narrative dominated headlines, rallying domestic support. The context that US tariffs triggered the ban was left out. The administration's tone was confrontational, not conciliatory. Trump's rhetoric closed the door on quick diplomacy. The $4.2 billion figure became a public challenge. The US signaled it would double down, not back down. The stage was set for escalation, not resolution. The crisis was now a test of political will. Both sides were digging in. The US depends heavily on Canadian copper. About 35% of its imports come from Canada. Domestic mining can't meet demand, making Canada a critical supplier. Losing this supply overnight triggered a severe crisis. Canada provides not just raw copper, but specialized products essential for US manufacturing. Replacing this volume and quality would take months, if not years. Key industries, construction, electronics, electric vehicles, were hit hardest. The electric vehicle sector in particular relies on copper far more than traditional cars. Ironically, the US tariffs meant to protect national security created a bigger vulnerability. The policy backfired, turning a manageable dependency into a full-blown supply crisis. American manufacturers felt the pain immediately. The sudden loss of Canadian copper sent companies scrambling for alternatives. Prices soared as firms competed for limited global supply. Higher costs squeezed profit margins and threatened jobs. These costs would be passed to consumers. Cars, electronics, and homes would all get pricier. Inflation would rise, stretching household budgets. The very workers' tariffs were meant to protect now faced layoffs. The ripple effects would be felt in factories and communities nationwide. The US-Canada copper clash sent shockwaves through global markets. Copper prices jumped 8% in a week, affecting buyers worldwide. The dispute showed how a bilateral spat could trigger global headaches. Other countries watched closely. Canada's bold move offered a new playbook for retaliation. Brazil and others began preparing their own countermeasures. Canadian miners quickly sought new buyers in Europe and Asia. If Canada cements these new relationships, the US may never regain its top customer status. Meanwhile, countries targeted by US tariffs formed new alliances, deepening global divides. India, China, and Russia strengthened ties, creating rival economic blocs. The US-Canada conflict became a symbol of a fracturing world order. Even close allies were now seeking partnerships elsewhere. The global economy was fragmenting before everyone's eyes. The copper crisis was just the beginning. As the trade war raged, Trump's tariffs faced a major legal threat at home. In late August, a federal appeals court ruled most of the tariffs illegal, saying the president had overstepped his authority. The decision cast doubt on the entire tariff strategy, including the copper duties. If upheld by the Supreme Court, the ruling could force the U.S. to refund up to $159 billion in collected tariffs. This would be a fiscal nightmare, and a huge win for American companies. The legal uncertainty added chaos to the copper crisis. U.S. industries were caught between a supply shock and a possible reversal of trade policy. The White House defended its tariffs, but its legal footing was shaky. The outcome could reshape U.S. trade policy overnight. The stakes had never been higher. By September 2025, U.S.-Canada trade relations had hit rock bottom. Years of partnership and mutual benefit had given way to suspicion, frustration, and a sense of betrayal on both sides of the border. The once busy crossings were now eerily quiet, and businesses on both sides braced for what might come next. The future was uncertain, with three possible paths ahead, each carrying its own risks and consequences for millions of people, industries, and communities. First, escalation. The U.S. could double down, imposing even more tariffs and restrictions, provoking further retaliation from Canada. This would deepen the conflict, disrupt supply chains, and threaten jobs and investments on both sides. The economic pain would ripple far beyond copper, affecting everything from agriculture to technology. Second, stalemate. The copper ban and tariffs could become the new normal, forcing both countries to adapt to a fractured relationship. Businesses would have to find new suppliers, workers might lose jobs, and the North American trade system could be permanently weakened, with trust eroded for years to come. Third, negotiation. De-escalation would require the U.S. to back down on tariffs, with Canada lifting its ban in return. But even if leaders chose this path, rebuilding trust would take time, patience, and a willingness to compromise on both sides. Rebuilding trust would be slow and difficult. Years of cooperation can unravel in days, but restoring confidence and repairing relationships is a much longer journey. The copper crisis was a warning about the dangers of protectionism and fragile supply chains. It showed how quickly economic ties can break down, and how vulnerable even the strongest partnerships can be in a changing world. Decades of cooperation unraveled in weeks, reminding both nations that trust, once lost, is hard to regain. The shared history of collaboration now seemed distant, replaced by uncertainty and doubt. The $4.2 billion dispute was more than a trade fight. It was a test of the principles behind global commerce. It challenged the very foundation of open markets, fair competition, and international cooperation. The choices made now would shape the future of North American and global trade. The world was watching, waiting to see whether old allies could find common ground, or if a new era of division would define the decades to come.